Hello and welcome everybody. It's episode 44 of the 6 Pixels Under podcast. I am nerdSlayer, your host. And on this week's episode, we have a couple current gaming topic news bits to get to. Google Stadia apparently isn't going to be able to guarantee that you can always have access to the things that you purchase on their platform. We'll talk about that in Jim Sterling's video on it. We'll talk about Bethesda changing or rather adding a login requirement to Doom after releasing it for, I think it was like $5, releasing Doom 1, 2, and 3 on the Switch, and then apparently requiring people to log into Bethesda and have a Bethesda account, which got a lot of people quite up in arms. We'll talk about that, and then we'll also talk about Disney apparently looking at acquiring, again, these are rumors, acquiring none other than Activision Blizzard. Apparently, some of Disney's investors were telling them that maybe they should purchase Activision Blizzard. And I'm not exactly sure why, but that's pretty interesting to know. That reminds me, let me change this. Doing it live. We're actually at 49 subs. We've been playing some MMOs, so buy it now while it's down. Okay, yeah. So we also have an MMO Roundtable topic, of course, to get to this week. And that one's going to be scheduled for later on in the podcast, of course. And this week's question is, can PvP and PvE in an MMORPG coexist? Are they too opposed to each other? And are you just best off picking one to focus on? Explain. So essentially, if that's a little bit too specific for you, then, make it a little bit more broad. In PvP and PvE, can they just coexist? Just leave it at that. And I don't just mean literally coexist, because of course it does coexist literally a lot. I mean actually is it good? Is it effective? Does it work together? And I'm curious what people's opinions are, because I've been told for a long period of really just my life, if you think about how long I've been playing MMOs, but I've been told that PvPers and PvEers they're opposed. They're always going to be opposed. That's something I've seen for such a long time now, over a decade, and yet I don't know if that's necessarily true yet. So I guess maybe we'll see if people have differing opinions. See what my opinion is on it as well. I have to get to today. Oh, we also before we get to the end of the podcast, I'll let you guys know if we have a shorter podcast today, I will end the stream in playing some Final Fantasy XIV, because I didn't really see a whole lot of interesting MMO news this week. To be honest, there actually wasn't a lot of MMO news. Most of the news has just kind of been the usual stuff kind of resurfacing or whatever else. Like Elder Scrolls Online, I guess, put out a roadmap of sorts for Q4, but with no inclination that they're going to fix their combat system. I don't really think people were so excited about that necessarily, based on what I could read. Guild Wars 2 is having a special live event tomorrow. Not sure what that's about, but that's another bit in MMO news. And then what else? Apparently, a website, Final Fantasy Logs, also creator of Warcraft Logs, a big time raider website, has stated that they're getting a lot of activity for Final Fantasy, possibly as much activity as Warcraft. So that, of course, without actually showing us everything and us knowing exactly, I saw a chart. I don't know if it's necessarily true. It looks to be somewhat true. Of course, this also has to do with when, sometimes whenever an expansion comes out, right, you're going to get the maximum level of traffic, of course. So it's we don't know necessarily what that means, but it is interesting to see. And frankly speaking, I certainly can say that while I still while I still think that WoW is on top, just because of market share, I think that without classic WoW, I think Final Fantasy would have usurped it pretty soon. I would say they're already reaching a point now where they're potentially matching their level of subscriptions. So it's they're just a little bit away from eclipsing WoW. But with classic WoW coming out, I'm sorry, I just don't really see it being possible for Final Fantasy to beat both of those. I think it can definitely beat modern WoW, and it has been since modern WoW has been sort of making more mistakes, I guess. And as Shadowbringers has done really well for Final Fantasy, well, pointed out. I have Final Fantasy lifted as the game I'm streaming right now. Yeah, let's change. I wish this thing was smart enough to have something like Nvidia does, kind of like senses what game you're playing. Then again, that'd be another way to attach their API to us. No. Did you see or have any interest in the latest WoW World first race for the new Mythic raid? I know that you don't care much about that kind of stuff, but I thought it was an interesting event. I didn't, and I think it's by the way, it's not because I don't really care about raiding per se. It's just more of like along the lines of adding just a hard difficulty to things. To me, isn't anything in itself enough to make me excited. So when people are like, "Oh, Savage raids or Primal raids or Mythic raids," it's like just throwing on the hard mode doesn't just make me want to raid. If it's a good raid, then maybe I'll do it, but just adding a hard mode to it or it having a hard mode wouldn't mean play it. So I haven't followed it yet, but maybe if someone can give you permissions in chat, you could link the video. We can look at it later at the call-in segment or something. Because I did watch one of those videos, and it was surreal seeing raiding as like a esport kind of thing. I honestly was one of the people that that said that I thought that I would never see such a thing, and it's different to say the least, and that's interesting. I just don't see Classic WoW sustaining the hype for too long. So this opinion, I feel like for my sanity, I really want you guys to get rid of this opinion. And it's because WoW has existed, once again, WoW has existed on private servers for over a decade. It's existed on private servers. Some of the oldest private servers that I played on, guys, I played on like 8-9 years ago. My point is that if Classic WoW sucked, if TBC sucked, why do they have so many servers? Why do they have so many successful private servers that have been running for such a long time? The only reason these servers aren't bigger is because they've been repeatedly shut down. So think about that. With fear of being cease and desisted, server makers are still creating servers just for Classic WoW, just for the Burning Crusade, and doing it even with fear of being sued and legal trouble as well. And then these servers are having bigger population than most MMOs, and they've been doing that for almost over a decade. It's kind of like, at this point, I just don't really get the whole, how is it going to be successful for a while when it's already been successful for a while? Yes. I guess you can argue it was free before, so like maybe the sub will add something extra to that. And that's a layer that we should certainly be willing to examine. But I mean, really, like if I'm Activision Blizzard in this case, I let people taste on Classic WoW for a bit. I drop a TBC server, keep Classic WoW servers, and then I also drop a progression server all at the same time. And progression server would just be like a Classic Plus server. I launch them all at the same time, giving the options all to my fans, and then I say, all right, once server transfers or a new character on these servers, you gotta have a new sub or whatever, right? Whatever way of making money out of that. But point being is, like, I feel like they could just package it all together. And I mean, they would satisfy every bit of their crowd while not really losing a whole lot of money from it. Besides, obviously, the effort that they would have to put into making TBC able to be ready like Classic is, which they already have experience with. And then also, the Classic Plus thing would require a lot of oversight because, man, that would be something that you could not mess up. Otherwise, you'd have like a RuneScape 3 situation where it's like it's still RuneScape, but it's not really RuneScape. You want more like an old school RuneScape scenario, and less like a classic RuneScape scenario that got shut down. No, I understand Fido, but it's just that people often say the rhetoric in the sense of, I don't understand how it's going to hold people's attention for very long. And I'm like, but it already has. It's not a question of if it can. It's not a question of can WoW last for 2 years. It's lasted for much longer than that. It's just that for me, it's annoying because I've lived in the private server realm pretty much my entire time as playing MMOs. Pretty much my whole time spent playing MMOs, I knew what private servers were. And I think that's because I played a lot of Neverwinter Nights. So I knew about moderated servers and lobby servers. And so when I started playing MMOs and with WoW, I could never afford a sub fee. So TBC was the first time I played WoW, and it was on a private server. And I remember going onto this private server and being like, wow, this world is more populated than many worlds that I've been on myself. And that was like the first time I had been opened up to the idea that the reason why that rhetoric annoys me is because it's like people ignore the fact that private servers have existed for like 2 decades. They've existed for such a long time just in general. And most, if not every single popular MMO has private servers or some sort of emulated server. WoW is one of the best. WoW has had some of the most successful. It's had some of the biggest. It's had some of the most highest profile that got shut down. Like, so WoW has always been in that private server space since really just the beginning. And they've done really well there. So I'm not going to say that there can't be arguments made as for when is content going to get boring. I make that argument all the time. And there can't be arguments to say how much our sub fee is going to affect population, of course. But there shouldn't be an argument of are people going to be able to play this for some time? Because they've already been doing that. It's already been going. Like, people have made new characters on every new progression server that's high profile. Like, I know players like that. Every new progression server, they make a new character. They just love the game so much, they'd rather just replay it again. I think that kind of tells you something about the current state of affairs of MMOs and things like that. I like Classic WoW to point out that the current MMO industry, that there's still a lot of demand for older style MMOs, but I won't be playing Classic myself. I think it's kind of hard not to see it that way, right? It's like, you want to be excited just because you're like, hey, I'm glad that this old thing is like possibly being new again, right? It's exciting again. But at the same time, you might not necessarily have the biggest interest in playing it, period, or playing it for a long time. And that's actually where I stand, is like, I don't know if I'll be playing past this year. I don't. But I will be following the story because it's very interesting to me, and I want to see what they end up doing. If they end up going a Classic Plus route, I'll be right here. Like, I'll be here to play. But I'm not a purist, and I'm not a player who's interested in playing the same thing forever. So, I've made it abundantly clear to people that if Classic just stayed Classic forever, even though I'm arguing that it would still have a player base, I wouldn't play it myself. Because I just don't have interest in a game that doesn't evolve. That's sort of why I don't really play Galaxies anymore. It's like, I've had so many experiences, great experiences, mind you, in that game, and a lot of fun times. But past a certain point, it's like, is it any different? Do they add anything new to it? Well, then, essentially, I've experienced that already, and I'm just experiencing some more. So it's like, maybe if I didn't get enough of that experience before, or maybe if I felt like there was just nothing else to play or enjoy. But I rarely find that that's the case, I guess. I will be playing Classic WoW because I never had played it, so I might as well give it a try. Looks interesting. That's also interesting to see, is people who never got to experience that get to go back into it. And I mean, really, like, I've played private servers now for a little bit, but I never got to play Classic WoW originally. And it was because, like, back then, the game was just like, there wasn't a whole lot of accessible ways to try it out. That came later, I think, in TBC, and that's kind of when I would start the trial and things like that. Yeah, like, Classic WoW is a rather new experience to me, and I didn't like original WoW when I played it. So it's like, I think what I realized the second time I played Classic WoW was that I was able to see through my, like, bias, if that makes sense. I was so biased before. I was so caught up in other MMOs, and I saw WoW as, like, this direct reason why my favorite MMOs were sort of getting killed. So I think I had a lot of, like, disdain for it early on because of that, especially conceptually, because I'm just like, man, this just seems like it's taking a lot of the cool elements and making them more simple, which is okay, except it's going to create this big ripple effect. And obviously, like, I had no clue WoW would become what it did. I mean, I don't think anybody really did. And when that thing blew up, it sort of made me look weird to be the one guy who dislikes the game in his social circle. Like, I was one of the few people who just refused to play for the longest time. And I mean, I went over and I played every now and then, and I was bored almost immediately. So it's like I never got that experience to enjoy the original classic WoW, which is a lot closer to what I would find enjoyable in a theme park MMO, as as much as you can get out of that sort of game. Personally speaking, which is just not my favorite kind of game. I prefer more sandbox games just because I like having more replayability, and I also like having the power of creation in my hands as a player. So I want to be able to create my own factions, my own world, my own town, my own guild, my own group of people, my own armor sets, my own class. Like, I like a lot more freedom over the things that I can create, just because when you're a new player to MMOs, or maybe let's say you're not even a player who should be playing MMOs, and what I mean by that is that maybe they're not necessarily your game. Maybe you're one of those people who says, you know what, I don't really have time to play games. Well, probably shouldn't play MMOs then. If it's one of those things where it's like, MMO fans have this idea of like, either you have to go all into an MMO like 40 billion hours a week, or you just can't play it casually, period. You can play an MMO casually, you just have to have a realistic expectation of playing it casually. And I think that's usually where most people end up quitting MMOs, is that they put in casual amounts of time and expect a hardcore level of enjoyment, or a hardcore level of payoff. When it's like, that's the beauty of an MMO, is that it's there for the hardcore player, but it's also there for the guy who just wants to take his time leveling up. And it's sort of always been that way. And it's good to see that sort of recirculating again. But as I've said before, I much rather would have new titles come out. New titles that push boundaries, new titles that push innovation. And as I was saying just now, push the idea of you being able to create your own content. Because as we've mentioned before, it's more economically feasible to allow your players to have greater control over their worlds, because it means that you're going to spend a lot less money on content. But the problem with that is that for developers, it's worth spending the money if it means they can make the money from it. So they don't care about spending the money as long as they're doing successfully. But that's the problem in the flaw with such a model, is that as soon as that MMO starts to not do so well, all of a sudden it's just this giant gaping hole, because without developers there to fill that hole and fix that hole, as you're seeing with Battle for Azeroth, and as you saw with Final Fantasy early on, Elder Scrolls early on, those games take massive hits whenever their expansions don't do well, and their player base isn't happy, because they're so reliant on developers constantly injecting new content into the game. But with more tools to affect content in your own way and create content in your own way, that wouldn't need to be that wouldn't need to happen, right? Like if the developers put out a bad contained story expansion, players could always just fill the gaps and make their own kind of stories. But why don't they want them to have that ability? Well, I don't know that answer exactly, but I have some speculation. You weren't wrong about it condensing and evaporating all the old school elements of the previous. Started the trend and continued the charge through. I think by starting the trend, though, it's not nearly as insidious as it seemed from the outside looking in. What I mean by that is, like, going back and playing Classic, I see a game much closer to EverQuest than most people are willing to admit. But that being said, I see it as, changing so greatly over expansions that it's just hard to think about the game maintaining its same level of vision. They're a same original idea. Sorry. Hi. That's just, I guess, my opinion. What I've got today that I want to get to first. So Google Stadia, there's been, obviously a bunch of news come out about this console. It's a console by Google themselves. And the problems that have been arising with this console have been, it's an online console, it's an online platform, which essentially presents the idea of, do I have ownership to my actual games that I own on this platform? If this program or platform is always online, does that mean that it could somehow, sense my information or whatever else? People are a little bit worried about it, right? Now, we've covered this in one of our other episodes. I can't remember what episode off the top of my head, but just go look for the title and go check that one out. But Jim Sterling did a video on it where essentially there's been some recent news that came out that essentially says something along the lines of they can't assure us that our game purchases will remain ours. And this might sound strange to some people. You might be thinking like, well, why wouldn't they be ours? Like, are they just going to like take them out or something like that? Like, you know, why would they do that? Like, it seems like it's like a bit of a conspiracy. Well, not necessarily, because the interesting thing is this is a bit of a anecdotal story, but let me let me pull this one up. I got it. Doing it live. I can't find it off the top of my head, but anyway, there was a number of events and a number of occurrences in the past with other consoles where such a thing has happened, where you had to either rebuy a game or whatever else. That's not that big of a deal. The problem here is that people have stated that on the Google platform itself, like the Google store, there's been times where developers have had disputes with the publisher in this case, or the person who operates on the platform, and have pulled their games from them. So are you telling me because the game is a cloud-based system, the platform is a cloud-based system, at any moment, if there's some type of like dispute, they could just take the game off, even though I've already purchased the game, and even though I already quote unquote am supposed to, own the game? You see how it gets a little bit problematic? Let's see what Jim Sterling has to say, though.
So they'll put in whatever DRM they want now, whatever online requirements.
Of course, he's talking about DRM.
And they don't really give us stuff about what happens in the future. Not their circus, not their monkeys. They'll do whatever benefits them short term and damn any long-term consequences. Unconvincing. Gaining traction at the moment is a Q&A session that was held.
I like how he zoomed in on his shoes.
Google Stadia's product director, Andrei Taronichev, answered questions about what would happen to people's purchased video games in the event.
Alright, so let me speed this up a little bit.
And when I say answered, I'm using a very charitable definition of the term, because the response is patronizing, sort of intellectually insulting, and doesn't really answer the question at all. And it's a fair question. Stadia will be streaming video games into people's houses. Google assures us that when we purchase one of these games, the game is ours, but we are completely relying on Google to provide access to that game. So if Google does get bored of Stadia, wanders off, if it doesn't work out for them, what on earth will happen?
And if the developer has a point of contention with the
some way to download that game after?
with Google, I mean, what are they going to do?
And if you have a sensitivity, a natural understandable sensitivity to toothless corporate bollocks speak, strap yourselves in. We get this a lot. I hear you. Moving to the cloud is scary. I felt the same way when music was transitioning from files to streaming. I still have all my old CDs in the garage, although it's hard to find a CD player these days. Smiley face. The same happened to movies and photos and my docs and other files, and it's great. Games are no different. Eventually, all our games will be safely in the cloud too. And
oh man,
we've been investing
the safely part was pretty memey.
And partnerships over the past few years. Nothing in life is certain, but we're committed to making Stadia a success. The games you buy on Stadia are yours to play. From day one, we'll support takeout so that you can download your game metadata, including saves if you want to. Of course, it's okay to doubt my words. There's nothing I can say now to make you believe if you don't, but what we can do is to launch the service and continue investing in it for years to come. Exactly how we've been doing with Gmail, docs, music, movies, and photos. That's exactly what we're committed to. Alright, I'll tell you where.
So let's just examine the message that the Google employee from Stadia official left. This is honestly like a really well done corporate post. I think this is pretty well done. Like, it's like, hey, fellow, internet user, we also noticed that CDs are no longer around, and they went to the cloud, and there's no problems there, right? I don't think there's any problems there, right, guys? It's like, wait, what do you mean there isn't any problems? There's a reason why so many people pirate movies. There's a reason that photos get hacked all the time, right? And there's a reason that music has constant problems with publishers paying artists pennies on the dollar because people don't actually own whatever they're buying. It's just a stream. They're just paying for an impression, which is like 0.02 cents or 0.002 cents or whatever it is. Like, something similar to my ad rate. But there's been problems in that respect too, if you think about it, right? There's been problems in the past with all of those things on the cloud being compromised in way. So it was like a well done post where like they just made it seem like there wasn't any problems there. Like, hey, remember those things? Like, they're great. And yeah, games are the same. So we're just going to do the same to games. But then I wonder, what would they do if a developer just decided we're not going to renew a contract with you? We're going to get out of this deal. It would essentially have to mean that game is pulled from the store, which would probably mean it's pulled from your console, right? If it's on a cloud, I don't know. I guess we'll have to figure out. I'm not going to spend that much more time wondering about a console that already has got me a little bit scared. Yeah, exactly, Zyker. Hello, fellow kids. That's kind of what it sounded like. That's a good one. Okay, let's see. Oh, yeah, and then there was this bit that came out, where it's just kind of like, what are you doing at this point? So Doom was made available. All 3 versions were made available on the Nintendo Switch. And Bethesda required people to log into Bethesda.net in order to, play the classic Doom games. This pissed a lot of people off, and from, certain points of views, it might seem a little bit unrealistic for people to get so mad about it, because it's sort of like, well, why do you guys care? All you have to do is just make a fake email and then log in, like this guy right here. Y'all find anything to cry over. Like, why are you just crying about this? Well, let's think about that, huh? Let's do what anybody should do in this scenario. When you see a scenario like this or a situation, think about it a little bit. Well, what could be problematic about a powerful publisher and developer having the ability to control my ability to log in to play classic versions of games? It's almost as if maybe a games as a service requires you to do the same thing, and maybe they're turning classic games into service games, right? I mean, sure, maybe it's just for the Slayers Club, like they said, right? Maybe it's just for achievement points or something like that. But is it out of the question to assume that they could then, I don't know, just add some microtransactions to it? Why is that out of the question? We've seen microtransactions in single-player games before now. Bethesda has put them into pretty much all of their games now. It doesn't seem crazy to expect such a thing as being possible. That's why it's so worrying to people, is because they're wondering, okay, if you can do this to old games, you're going to sell me old versions, old classic remasters and things like that, and then you're going to litter them with microtransactions. And obviously, that's a very scary thing for many people, because they love the idea of playing a classic remastered game, but they don't want to have to log into Bethesda's, a Slayers Club or whatever else in order to play the game, if they also have to purchase it. If it's a matter of like, hey, log into our data service so we can use your data, but we'll let you play the game for free, okay, you're trading something for that, right? But when you're paying for the game and they're making you do that, it's just like, dang, dude. So many companies these days, I feel they really do try and get all the money. Not just some money, not just a good amount of money. They really do look to get all of it. This concept, by the way, is explained in business, and I don't remember the concept off the top of my head, but it's something along the lines of, if you can control the medium, control the service, and control the product, you have an ability essentially to sell whatever you want, right? Because you can create your narrative, you can create your product, and then you can say that this is what my product means, this is what my product's for. I think a good example of that is how Fallout 76, despite getting so much crap, I still got posts on my Quake Champions video of people telling me, but it wasn't early access. It's like, it launches unfinished. It launches with a paid exclusive beta. and nobody's wondering if that's considered early access? Just because they didn't call it early access? You see what I'm saying? Because they can just like call it a beta and then just launch it as a fully launched game. That's enough to just make you not want to examine that further and be like, well, kind of seems like an early access game, even though it's not early access. It's so silly. People slowly start to grow a little bit wise about the precedent. They know if we give them the smallest bit, they will take it all. Full price early access game that was barely functioning. Common AAA practice at this point. And that's the thing is like, when am I going to stop seeing consumers shill for corporations? That's just a little bit weird to me. Paid beta has been a thing for a long time. I actually don't have a problem with paid beta. But paid beta is not what they did. It's different to say, hey, you can get an early access start at our game by pre-ordering it. Except Fallout 76 isn't a MMO. I personally don't know of a survival game that's done that before. So maybe it's possible. But here's the other thing. If you signed up earlier and had the closed beta access to the game, you kept your progress, which again is directly incentivizing you to want to do that. In most, if not all, betas, you do not keep your progress. They kept their progress, dude. It's early access, man. Like, I mean, call a spade what it is, dude. If you keep your progress, it's not just beta. That's early access. You're keeping some level of persistence. Well, that's what people have been mad about, Limpos. I mean, like you said, paid betas have existed in MMOs even just for over a decade. I mean, I can remember them shit. Global Agenda was a paid beta. But keeping progress? I mean, I've never heard of a game like that keeping progress. But I know why they would. Because it's not a beta. It's an early access thing. They just want to incentivize people to buy it, right? I mean, it's good business. Doesn't mean that I have to support it. This also came out, which is worth examining a little bit as well, that a Disney investor thinks that the company should buy game maker Activision Blizzard. So as the article sort of states here on Bloomberg, which is, you know, this is a real article. This is a real a rumor, I should say. Activision Blizzard's declining share price over the past several months have some speculating the video game company could be a takeover target. And apparently some Kawasaki guy thinks that Walt Disney Co. should be the buyer. Ideally, for an investor, you want this to happen now. Kawasaki owns roughly 90,000 shares of Activision, worth about $4.3 million, according to the data compiled by Bloomberg. Disney is in the firm's top 3 holdings, with an I3F filing listed more than 152,000 shares, valued at almost $22 million. Oh, wow. So these aren't just rumors, huh? This is a little bit more interesting than I thought originally. Disney's history in the video game business isn't great. The company acquired game makers such as Playdom and Club Penguin. God, I forgot about Club Penguin. Bought game studios and launched a gaming platform called Infinity. Never heard of it. But after running up hundreds of millions of dollars in losses, the company shifted to letting companies like Electronic Arts make games. Yeah, I remember the quote that they said was that we've never been particularly good at doing video games. And I'm like, maybe you guys haven't, but LucasArts used to be good at making video games, and you guys now own the Star Wars IP. I digress. Disney already televises Activision's Overwatch League, apparently. Wow. Okay, I did not know that. That's totally news to me. Wow, look at how expensive that would be. It would be a massive acquisition. But there are some like legitimate rumors here. I mean, between these two guys already, they own over 200,000 shares. So that's not to say that that's like enough to buy the company. I mean, those are just pennies compared to the billions of dollars that would be required. But what would happen? I mean, what would happen if Disney was able to acquire Activision Blizzard? I guess there's no planet that they wouldn't try and then make some sort of like Disney MMO. But would they or would they not? Would they just, I don't know. It's like, it's weird to think about, because if Disney were to acquire Activision Blizzard, they probably would just let them operate as they're operating now, mostly speaking. But of course, they would allow them to use Disney IPs, which almost is like scary to think about. If there's not going to be a change in the company, then I don't want them to just do whatever is the current status quo. Just also do that with Disney IPs. You know, I don't want that to happen necessarily. If this would happen, I would want some sort of change in structure as well. Maybe they can actually start refocusing on making new. Disney seems to just mostly let things go under their, or go on their own way, and then reap the profits. And that's sort of what I was thinking. And I don't think that would be the smartest response here, because they did that already with Electronic Arts. And I felt like the reason why Electronic Arts didn't get more shit over Battlefront 2 was because they also did that mobile game that did really, 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 really well. What's that game called? Sometimes people talk about it in chat, but like, I don't know. It's one of those like super microtransaction mobile games that they have like certain microtransactions that are like hundreds of dollars. I can't remember what that game's called, but it did pretty well for Disney. So maybe they didn't care about Battlefront as much or something like that. Galaxy of Heroes? Yeah, Galaxy of Heroes, something like that. I know they make a lot of money off of that game. Toontown, yeah. Toontown essentially was a Disney MMO of sorts, yeah. They wouldn't risk a Disney MMO. They are very guarded with what they use their characters for. Yeah, I mean, Toontown sort of was like that before, but it didn't really let them use their like main characters, right? It was kind of like, it reminded me of like City of Heroes, where it's like you can almost make the characters, but you're not really making. I think all the entertainment within 10 years would be owned by Disney at this rate. Yeah, it's kind of scary to think about, but I mean, this company just keeps acquiring more and more. It's getting to the point to where, why not own a company like that, right? Why not make some online games, or at least more of them, since it's not something that they typically really get into. At this point, I'd like to ask everybody who's interested in joining me for the MMO Roundtable to go ahead and join the podcast lobby. The weekly topic, again, I'll post it in chat, is going to be, can PvP and PvE in an MMORPG coexist? Are they two opposed to each other? And are you best off just picking one to focus on? If you'd like to join the podcast lobby and get your bid in, just remember the MMO Roundtable is a bit on the podcast where the community comes together. We pick a certain topic for the week. We get to talk about it in the Discord section. And then we also get to talk about it live on the podcast. Each person gets to say their own bit, their opinion, their thoughts. And then at the end, we get to all kind of share collectively, disagree or agree, or whatever ends up happening. It's just a place for discussion to talk about maybe MMO questions that don't normally get answered, or maybe get addressed all that much. So we can kind of have some thought experiments and really just hopefully show a lot of different experiences or different perspectives regarding a specific question. Yeah, be aware, as Card says, if you would like to join, now's your chance. Because if you wait longer, you won't be able to join. I don't want people joining after the fact, after everyone's given their little part, because it makes it harder to manage. What I will do while everyone's getting ready in podcast lobby, I'll give you guys a little bit more time. I'll go ahead and read some of the bits of discussion we've had already in the Discord section, the MMO Roundtable. Because sometimes people can't make it to the podcast, and I like to go through and read maybe particular points that were addressed to me or anything like that. I'm scrolling through right now. It looks like we had a lot of discussion, and it was like spread out, so I might not be able to remember where to start. Let's see. I'll go back to where I first added everybody, because I think a couple of people added me in response. Okay. Here we go. So the first one that I'll go with is sorry, looking back at it, it's pretty funny. we had something from the Iron Yuppie. He said PvE and PvP need to be balanced separately. See the Guild Wars skills for that. Trying to balance both at the same time leads to never-ending systems bloats. Mick Stackerson said, look at MOBAs. Of course you can have elements of both. And Beef Via says, if you want both to coexist, you need a healthy player base that is actually interested in both or in either or both. Then there is an issue of balancing when you have things bound to stats, causing PvE balance is an entire different beast to PvP. And then Leva said, I think they can coexist as well, though I think PvP is often only made into killing, which I think is only really scraping the surface. I think PvP is important for every kind of play, be it adventurer, socializer, killer, or archiver. Since it's good to help the narrative competition or feeling of unity, but I think the most important to make is to work with the mechanics that play into the world. If the only mechanic that you get is you can really interact with players is the combat, then crafting, gathering, and socializing is more of a side note. Then I don't know if the two crowds will exist very peacefully together. That's a good point. Essentially, Leva the Late is saying that if you're going to have a PvP system and a PvE system where they work together, then if you want them to be able to work together, you have to make it to where they can interact with each other more than just killing each other. I think that's a good point. Good point, Card. I forgot about that. Hey, what's up, everybody? Alrighty. So if everyone who would like to go in an order just raises their hand, if not, oh, we already got some hands raised. Cool. Let me put my hand in there too. All right. So to start us off, it looks like Card's the first in line. So Card, can you answer the question of our weekly topic question of can PvP and PvE in an MMORPG coexist and why?
They most definitely can, and there have been some well-known examples. So, of course, I will mention the game I keep mentioning a lot here because it works kind of well. Would be Eve, and I would especially draw attention to the wormhole space, because wormhole space is an area where you truly see that PvE and PvP is mostly done by the same people and done when it is necessary. So PvE is done when they can to make the required funds and get the required resources that they need. And PvP is constantly needed to either be on the defense or when you go on the offense to go to some other places where you may want to get some of their stuff or you just want to get some fun. And I think that is a very basic system. It's like in order for PvE and PvP to work together, you need to be incentivized to do both. However, if you have players that say like, I only want to do PvE, which there are plenty there around in EVE Online, there are a lot of them who actually PvP. If you sell your stuff on the market, you partake in the market PvP. If you're mining resources from a moon, you partake in a resource PvP because there are other players who may want that moon. And in fact, a lot of PvE players hire PvP players to destroy stations so that they can put their own station on there. So they are partaking in PvP, albeit not directly. And I think that's also a very important thing you can make in a system. Like, if you have a system where the PvE works, but it is always under threat, so you can always take over whatever somebody's doing, you automatically generate PvP. Even if the PvEers are like, not so much, but like, most PvEers will be fine with it as long as it's not too overbearing for them. It's like not a continuous, endless cycle. They want to have their ability to do their PvE, and that needs to be respected in ways. But as I said, I think if you combine it well, you balance it out well, either by making it so that there is PvP, even if it's not very directly for the PvE people, or you create a MMO where it's just like, if you want to do one, you're doing the other and vice versa. Like, Yeah, you may not be the best PvPer, but you'll still join up with some people because you can still help out in order to defend your location so you can get your resources. So I don't think there's any reason to say they cannot coexist or work together actually really well.
I think I'm next. I think PvP and PvE for sure can coexist together in a MMORPG. My example would be BDO, as that's the one I've played recently. I see PvP as like a sort of destruction mechanic in a game, and PvE as sort of like a creation mechanic, and that's like a cycle that you have of sustainable content. And if you have too much of one side, it can cause imbalance. You need balance of PvP, and if you have too much PvP, it can cause too much destruction, and so that too much destruction result in nothing meaningful being created. But if there's too much PvE, then I think there's this being inflation of resources, and there's no point getting these resources if there's no consequences. No, when I say PvP, I usually mean like open world PvP and other meaningful types of PvP where resources are at stake, not like arena PvP. I think that we should talk about like how developers should make PvP and PvE coexist. And I think this will allow to have tools for players to avoid PvP or control PvP. For example, having like rules like they have in real life. If you kill someone in real life, there's consequences, and that's what it should have in MMORPGs. Maybe a bit different. There could be like a bounty system, or if you kill somebody, you may lose items upon death again, or corruption system. But similar sort of system. Uh, but the PvP can still kill players, but they'll need to like balance the risk versus reward. Like, do I really need to kill that person? Is it really worth it? And if it's really worth it, it might pay off in the end. Also, actually, no, that'd be all. Actually,
Okay, then it's my turn. I guess I'll go against the flow and say absolutely not. They cannot coexist. And that's a good thing, because you need some kind of adversity within games. And that's sort of the point of the PvP, is that is part of the adversity. So even though PvP, PvE players might not like that PvPers exist and would like their game to not have them within the game, tough luck. It's like, I think it's a fairly vital part of the game to have PvP, simply because you need to be able sometimes just to get rid of some people, and as well as also as Black Ruin sort of mentioned, you need some chaos and destruction within the game, and not just from the PvE side, because the PvE side is very what do you call it? Stable, like, or not stable. Why can't I think of the word for it? It's predesigned. Well, no, it's predesigned, which means it's always going to be the same. Whereas something like PvP, that will almost always be different. And that's where PvP comes in and throws that wrench into the entire machine, that you can't just run around willy-nilly picking flowers all day or killing mobs all day. Sometimes that orc is gonna come around and he's gonna stab you in the back. That's my point. Next.
All right, so I think one of the main reasons that PvP and PvE don't coexist in video games is because of how mechanically different they are. Because for most games, and like, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that PvE is always asymmetrical. Well, not always, but like most of the times you're fighting against enemies that function differently than the player characters, and PvP is symmetrical, where you're fighting against other players that have like the same opportunities as you have. Like, their characters have maybe similar health pools, maybe they have a bit higher, a bit lower. And I think it would be interesting. I think like the perfect game where PvE and PvP could coexist would be a game where where the PvE was also symmetrical, where the enemies like had similar health pool and mechanics than the players. The problem is that the reason why symmetrical fights are fun, like the reason why PvP is fun, is because you're fighting against a player who is like as smart as you are and can make interesting choices and decisions with the same tools as you have. And normally PvE is more about doing mechanics, about dodging the red circles, and I think it will take much more effort and resources to make a symmetrical PvE game than an asymmetrical one, because normally the AI in for most bosses is kind of dumb. Like they just repeat some pattern. Like it's kind of like the reason we have stuff like threat in like games where there's raids. So like you can actually manipulate easily who the boss targets. So like that's kind of like my point, is that uh, I think it would be really interesting to see a game where the PvE was symmetrical.
Okay. So I think I am going to also like limp-toss a little bit. I'm gonna split hairs, and for me, it's because I'm actually going to make the argument that I don't think you can have good PvE without PvP. Period. So I think that they have to be linked together, because I think that the best kind of PvE, in my experience and from my observation, is the kind that also has player interactions and player conflict also being a possibility. I mean, if you just look at the real world, right? What's missing in most MMOs that focus on PvE is PvE isn't big enough of a threat as it is in the real world. If you think about that, right? We go back to like a caveman time. PvE is enough of a threat back then to where people have to be social. That's why we developed so much as social creatures. So without PvE being so integral and also just dangerous, what ends up happening is people just get bored and kind of just want to like kill shit, and then next thing you know, if the only thing you can do is kill stuff, well then you're only going to kill people, and you're going to kill those players who want to do PvE and maybe don't just want to randomly kill other players. And so they, see PvPers as, well, you just want to kill people without any kind of like, consequences, and you're just doing that to be a dick. And then how do you see them any other way? Because it's kind of like, without an ever-present PvE threat, there isn't enough of a reason, first off, to want to band together, and then also to want to band against other people. So it's like, if we had a mob in the game, or some kind of roaming mob that had, like, let's say it was a group of 6 mobs that as it roamed grew in power. So as it took out other mobs or players or whatever else, it got gear and it got more things. It got upgraded. This mob eventually would get so big, and this is not a concept that's completely new. I've seen it done in small scales, but just not on a large scale in an MMO. But this mob would eventually get so big to where it would start attacking like settlements and players and things like that, to where people would then have to band together to actually address it. But what if another player saw that as an opportunity to be like, well, hey, you're attacking this mob. This mob is actually part of my faction. So now I'm going to attack you as a player. I think it becomes too easy for the PvPer to just make it about PvP, and the PvEer to make it just about PvE. I actually think, as I was stating, that they have to be closer linked together. Otherwise, don't try and make like one a particularly big focus, if that makes sense. And I know that's like really like paradoxical, because it's like, how do you focus on both? That's kind of my point, is I think you actually, if you want to make the best PvE and PvP experience, you need the best PvE experience. And for the best PvE experience, you need the best PvP experience. That's just my experience.
Right. So I'm gonna kind of lump in with Lempos and Nerd here when it comes to. I don't think it's ever been done. I don't think it's something we've seen yet, where a game can truly be massively successful without relying too much on one or the other. I think it's more of a to be decided thing, with certain games coming out here in the future that are starting to finally break away from the WoW clone tab targeting tradition, maybe we'll see something like that. But all the successful games right now have instance PvE, and that's where you gear up. And most of the games, the PvP aspect is almost essential off of your gear and how good you'll be based on your gear. So I don't think we've actually seen a game really. Somebody said Eve online. I can't speak on that, but I've heard like a lot of good things about how it has that sandbox PvE economy that leads up and like builds basically like armadas for the PvP side. So Eve maybe might be the game that has done it, but I've never seen a game that's had overwhelming success and sustained its success with a straight up 50-50 mix of PvP and PvE. Normally it's all instanced, and if you want to be a PvP player, you have to play in your zone. And if you want to be a PvE player, you basically can do whatever you want. I don't know if you've heard about this, nerd, but Legends of Aria is officially going PvE, which is just a perfect example of how these PvP games that are like 2 PvP just can't succeed. Like, eventually PvPers become too much for a casual audience, and they'll leave and play a different game that's more PvE orientated. So that's my 2 cents on. I don't think it's not possible. I don't think we've seen it yet.
Right. Osayev? I'm not sure how you want to pronounce your name, but you actually brought up the fact like bringing PvE to the same level as PvP. So make a PvE enemy like a PvP enemy. And that reminded me of something that I'm not sure if it's still on the agenda. I hope it still is, but that's actually something that they talked about. They want to do with Install Citizen. They said like, we want to make sure that like if you're fighting a PvE pilot in ship type X, or you're fighting a player pilot in ship type X, the challenge should be equal, or depending on how they're tuned, of course, the player pilot might be better than a particular PvE pilot, or it may be the other way around. But in the end, they're still going to have the same ship, the same stats. So the only thing that's going to be different is their ability in using that ship and the equipment they got on there. But it's not going to be like most PvE, as you mentioned, with big boss fights and stuff like that. This ship is going to be suddenly having 100 times more hit points despite being the same ship as you are. I think that's actually a really good way in, balancing the two out. But it would only work, in my opinion, in a real skill-based game. It would not work in a traditional tap targets sort of MMO. So I think as a general rule, because it really is asking bringing players towards their, balancing around skill and not around a lot of the abilities and things like that. So it could be a really good way in bringing the two together overall. So I really like that idea, and I just brought it back up. So I think it's one of the other ways to do it. And looking at on the Eve is like, the PvE generally supports the PvP. And it used to be quite a bit of conflict over PvE resource. It's not really happening. It's like I said, I think of the MMOs out there, Eve probably has got the closest in balancing PvP versus PvE, but I don't think it's there yet, like still quite ways off.
Okay, I think I'm next. One of the things I forgot to discuss about in my previous discussion I was talking about is the other mechanics that developers could add to MMORPG for PvP and PvE to coexist is having abilities for players to protect or pay other players to protect themselves when going across towns to trade, and paying allies if there's a siege where your home could be destroyed. And I think it's important that these mechanics are set in stone early in the game, and balanced early in the game, so that you attract a player base that will accept this balance of PvP and PvE. And if you end up changing it, then later in the game, then some of these players will not really like it. And also, having it set early in the game, the players will have the mentality wrapped around the balance of what the PvP and the PvE is.
So something that I think is interesting to talk about is just like what are the common occurrences or problems that you see whenever these games try and I guess combine together. And if people want to go ahead and comment about that, I'll go first since I'm already talking about it. But oh wait, was it Limboss up? Sorry. I was trying to ask a new question, but go ahead, Limboss, and then you can answer it after if you want.
Over my time. No, so actually, I had a thought because after what nerdSlayer said, and also about the MOBAs, and about mixing PvE and PvP, because that's already something we don't actually really see in a lot of games. Is players playing alongside just AIs? I think really only MOBAs, For Honor, and Titanfall. I think those are the only ones I can really think of. And then I thought you could actually somewhat implement that into an MMO, some kind of battleground or some kind of zone where, say, for example, the AI runs out with, say, 20 troops or something, and you can then elect to follow them, protect them from players, protect them from other AIs, the enemy AIs in this case. And because then you have something for both, because then you have something for the PvE players to go out and kill and ensure that that your side is winning, and the PvP players can go after the players who go after the PvE. It was sort of just a random thought to sort of throw out there because I haven't seen that so much.
I agree with Card, by the way. He said, for those who aren't reading, he said, sounds like what WoW Warzone should have been. That's why people have been really sad about them. And yeah, I agree. Like what you're saying, Limposs, is my essential idea of if you can allow a scalable, movable, and realistic PvE threat, I promise you guys, I've seen it in other games. It just hasn't been done in a MMO yet at a large scale. But in these games, it's possible to have a PvE threat so great that if players don't work together, you'll just get killed. And like a perfect example is have any of you played The Forest? The Forest is a survival, almost like co-op game of sorts. It's not really made to be like a multiplayer or an MMO or a typical survival game, but it's got a world narrative, and it also has a building system. That game's pretty hard. Like, I mean, I played that game on the hard difficulty. I think it's a pretty hard game, and it's pretty much only NPCs that you're fighting against. So it's like, imagine if you had a world like that, where the NPCs were like the mutants in The Forest, where you would actually be scared to go out. You would have to work with other players. So if you were that player who just killed everybody all the time and you were labeled as a villain or as some kind of like, brigand, and people saw you and noticed that that's what you were, they would kill you as well. And so next thing you know, you're going to be this like, exiled person in society, as you should be if you're just a random murderer or a random killer. But I think, it's like, how much do you want to go towards that? And also, how much is AI going to evolve? Because AI isn't evolving as much as we thought it would evolve by this point.
It's more a question of balancing AI. Because AI is, like, if they want to, they can just make AI own everybody. Like, that's not difficult. Making AI that doesn't own everybody is difficult.
That's actually a really good point. That just up the damage, make it more precise, make it use the correct abilities at the absolutely perfect time. If there's multiple AIs, have them actually work together, overlapping their abilities, so they ensure you basically die.
Yeah.
But then I guess, I mean, that sort of is what MMOs sort of should encourage. Then is that people, or it would encourage that people then have to work together. You have to find enough people to take down the big scary monsters. You have to find good enough people. You have to also learn, instead of just strolling through everything, maybe like rolling your head across your desk or a keyboard.
I mean, if you're gonna do like those ever-increasing powerful monsters, I mean, this is one of those cases where you want to get a lot of randomness in there. Like, just give them have a very large list of random sort of abilities, and just assign any number of them to any of these bosses, and have them get more and more as they grow more powerful. That way, each time you're going to fight one of these things, it is going to be a reactionary fight. It's not going to be like a typical raid of like, oh, here I stand, I know exactly what's going to happen in 30 seconds. And then we're going to, after that, it's going to be 60 seconds for that. And then, but before the 60 seconds over, at 40 seconds, this is going to happen. Like, there's a reason, like, you can literally raid in World of Warcraft. You just download a Deadly Boss Mod add-on, and you just follow the instructions that it gives you.
It's basically a dancing game at this
Yeah,
point.
it's.
I click these buttons now.
I mean, that is what it comes down to.
Yeah.
And I think that's just not fun PvE. If you can make your PvE. Go ahead.
Okay. To be a bit fair, some raids and some bosses aren't exactly just all the time the exact same thing. They do try to throw some random stuff in there, but it is usually on a timer, which is sort of where the big problem comes in, because you know it ahead, so you're ready to it. Like, that's it's the equivalent is somebody throwing a ball at you without knowing it, and somebody not or knowing somebody's going to throw a ball at you. You're going to catch the ball far more in one of those scenarios. Also, another thing that I just wanted to say, Rift was probably one of the games that came the closest to what I mentioned that nerdSlayer mentioned, but it just wasn't there. I mean, it was somewhat of a threat that it would take over parts of the zone, but it wasn't entirely there. Like,
I have a theory about that.
Oomph. What, casualization?
No, the Rift. I have a theory about Rift.
Okay. Go ahead.
My theory is that they wanted to do it. They wanted it to be a big thing. But I think at first, when they didn't have as much success at launch, because Rift, as you know, had more success later after launch than it did at launch, weirdly enough, because it had like a resurgence of sorts. I think that came with this. Was it the first expansion or was it the second one?
First expansion, Storm Legion.
Yeah, so Storm Legion, brought a lot of popularity back to the game. I would say a bigger population than was there at the very beginning. But I think that they created this system, if you saw my video on it, where they could affect things in a dynamic world. It was very interesting that they could do that, and yet I felt like they did basically nothing with it. And I think that just kind of shows you they had the capability in their engine to do it. They did do it in some zones, as you mentioned, but I think, was it a matter of they just couldn't figure out how to monetize it? Because it's like, why didn't they play that up some more? I mean, the Rift and World events were pretty cool, and going through a Rift and things like that were cool. But after a certain point, that also becomes less accepted. So I just wonder, that was like always my theory with Rift, is I wonder if they just couldn't figure out how to make money off of it.
Well, it was subscription-based for the longest time. So, I mean, they did make that money.
True.
But yeah, I'm not sure why they...
Maybe that's the only way to do it then?
The game is called Rift, and they sort of did point towards these dynamic Rift, which, just like Guild Wars 2, they weren't exactly dynamic. It was just, they were scripted to appear at certain times, but they would be random half the time. Also in Storm Legion, they sort of cut back on that, which always somewhat surprised me. I can't remember a single zone outside of one where they could actually take over.
That's a good point. I didn't think about it.
It's just like the case of the classic PvE crowd going to be like, they are focused like this raiding core player base, like they're focused on these raids that do these far more predictable scenarios. So they like to really fine-tune to those scenarios to get absolutely the best out of those scenarios, and that's their idea of a challenge. Whereas I think the PvP crowds, they are looking for that randomness. They want to them fighting this PvE is like, I know what's going to happen. This is boring. But the PvP fight is like, you're never going to know what's going to happen, and that's what's enticing. Maybe they marketed the game in that way to the wrong crowd. Like, maybe they should have marketed this game like, this is the game, this is the this is the game with the PvE the PvPers are gonna love. And if they should have also gone like full in on this randomness, like not half baked, but full in, maximum commitment. I wonder what would have happened if they'd done that.
Come to think of it, or Rift actually also had PvP rifts, and they
Yeah.
actually had really good rewards, which sort of incentivized PvP to happen as well.
Especially at the lower levels. That was the coolest part about leveling in Rift, was you never know what could happen. You could have a world event happen, or next thing you know, you're fighting a guy who came through the rift or whatever. Like, that was a cool part of that experience. But yeah, somebody was saying in chat earlier that they get excited more so whenever they're PvEing and there's a chance of PvE or PvP. I'm actually going to make the argument that's because that's how it was in the real world. Think about it. Like, for some reason, most MMOs these days, the perspective on a PvE player is one of a casual. But I played MMOs back then, and I know PvE players who are way more hardcore than any PvP player I've ever met. And I just think that it's a different medium. Obviously, they express themselves differently. But you can't say that all, obviously, PvE players are just casual. Of course, many of them are very hardcore. I think that they just haven't been given that even more hardcore experience besides like survival games, which do a poor job at PvE. But they haven't really had that game where it's like really about surviving and it's an ever-present, battle for survival and things like that. Because again, if we bring it back to just, looking at human civilization, whenever you're struggling to overcome that threat and you're working together, there's also going to be a group of people who think it's worth to take the risk to attack that person who's trying to defend themselves as well. Because maybe you think that's worth more than going out and getting the resources yourself. It comes back to, like, with PvE and PvP, I think that PvE can be way more difficult and way more fun than it currently is. I think that there's also perfect opportunity to not just get rid of instance content. I'm not against instance content. I think that, good theme park content can be fun, can be enjoyable. But I think that why don't you just give that to the players to create, right? Give them the tools to create their own scenarios, their own instances, and then maybe every expansion or whatever else you do your own and people buy that. But why not also just give more chances for dynamic content to happen out in the world where you wouldn't even need to constantly be worrying about upkeep. You just, like we were talking about earlier with our idea of the mobs, you just spawn these mobs, and like I think it was Limpos or Card was saying, you could choose to assist this group, and maybe they grow in size or in power, and maybe you go and fight other armies or other NPC groups with it, and maybe you also encounter players because of that. And there's even more mechanics that go into that, because you could also add in the ability to actually address your troops, right? Tell them to go places. We've talked about that a lot because we all love Mount and Blade here, but we talk about that a lot of, maybe you could send your troops somewhere, your AI troops somewhere. That adds a whole nother layer to the game, because it shouldn't just be about PvP. It should also be about PvE. And I think using AI is a good way of bridging that gap, because maybe you, Limpos, as a PvE player, I'm saying you're a PvE player in this example. You're a strict PvE player, but you're damn good at greasing the wheels and talking to people and working with the different factions. So next thing you know, your AI army is bigger than most people's real armies. So it's like you're still a threat as a PvE player, even if you don't PvP yourself.
Yeah. I think Card, yeah, he just went away, so I guess it's my turn. And I've, of course, almost forgotten what I was going to say. Let me just think for just a second. No. Safe, go ahead.
Okay, so I wanted to address one of the things you've been talking about, nerdSlayer, which is you've been talking a lot about dynamic content, and it's something that like for me it's kind of becoming like the holy grail of MMORPGs, because it's what everyone wants but nobody can find. I think that like I think like in a previous podcast I asked you before, like why do you think that they don't make this kind of content? I think like one of the main reasons is because I think it would be hard for people to actually value that kind of content, because like most of the time it's kind of hard to see like what's going on in a dynamic event, right? Like, so if you don't have like a deep understanding of how the game works, maybe scripted content just looks the same as the dynamic content for you. And also so basically I think that dynamic content is I mean, it's probably I'm not sure because I don't really know, but I think it's probably expensive or resource intensive to make, and I think most players wouldn't actually like get it.
You're
So
sorry, that card was gonna go.
Oh, you can, yeah. I just wanted to talk about. We always mention consequences a lot, and as like we always love the idea of having things having consequences. How about those bosses, those enemy PvE forces that spawn? Like, if we don't succeed in stopping them, they can just literally end the server. They can just take over completely.
Yeah, that's what
And
it was
just
in
like,
Rift.
yeah,
In
but
some
like
zones.
complete server. Now with the entire server at some point. Like, if you don't stop them at some point, like they're gonna be so powerful they can take over the entire server. And your character, yeah, well, you didn't stop them.
That's where it like requires you to be risky, I think, to make a good MMO. You kind of almost have to be risky in some ways because it's like, unless you're just a big corporation who has a lot of money who can take somebody else's idea and then just kind of like repurpose it, you're gonna have to be risky in some way. You're not gonna be able to just do what everyone else is doing with less resources, essentially. Something that Osai said that I really liked though was that some players can't tell the difference between scripted content and dynamic content, and it's true. It is. Like, I've experienced this so much in my own observations, also with just like in Black Desert Online, for example. People tell me all the time, oh, but the game is physics based, oh, but the combat is like, accurate, and I'm like, you don't understand what animations are, do you? Like, you don't really know the difference between a character being animated and a character having a hitbox that works like this versus a hitbox that works like this. Like, most people don't know the difference. So when they look at the game or they play the game, for them, it's everything that it seems like it is, right? Everything that it advertises it to be, because they don't know the difference. So I do wonder about that sometimes. But I think that also goes back into what I mentioned to you before as an answer, which is just, I think it's hard for people to figure out how to monetize that. If you're going to abandon the monthly subscription fees, it's hard to monetize consistent content in that way unless, I don't know how else you could do it besides doing a subscription fee, because I just don't like the idea of having to constantly purchase things like that. It seems weird in an open world setting that you would purchase things like that. It's more likely that you would make money off of either XP potions, cosmetics, or monthly fees or whatever else.
I would say that monetizing is not going to be hard. You just make it pay to win. I mean, there you go, easy peasy. But of course, people won't like that, and it's not a good idea. But I did have something else to say, and I remembered what it was, and it was in regards to the whole thing about PvE as sort of getting a certain thrill out of PvP as existing. Like having that risk be in the game is something that sort of can push them ahead. And thought about something like Dark Souls, because Dark Souls is very, very unique in that respect, simply because like as soon as you went human, there was always somewhat of a risk that somebody was going to come in there and kick your butt. And MMOs sort of have the same thing in that regard. And even sometimes you don't even have to fight them. Like, you can just see them in the distance. Like, you go hide behind a tree and sort of try and keep eyes on them. What are they doing? Which is a completely different kind of experience from PvE. You don't hide behind the tree looking at the mobs across the field. You run at them and kill them. That's it.
One thing I don't understand is like how devs don't realize the amount of content you get from having open world PvP, and like in Guild Wars 2 and Eve, where they have PvP secluded in this arena or large map and not integrated in the main overworld and making it have consequences if you lose the battle or whatnot. One example I'll give the amount of content that can come from is BDO. It's simply one dude just mining rocks or killing mobs, and all of a sudden another guild comes and one dude comes and tries to take over them, and then it creates this conflict, and then my guild will come protect him, and then they're like, oh, we need to get more guys, and more guys keep coming and more guys keep coming, and this small fight ends up becoming this massive fight, and sometimes this fight will last 3-4 hours, and this is 3-4 hours of content that these developers haven't created, but it's the players who've created it, and they can easily just go back to what they were doing before, the stories and stuff. They can just go back to that after, but this is like 3 hours of content that the developers get for free.
Yeah, well, there's I'll respond first off to the part that's most relevant to that. Developers, I think, keep PvP and PvE separate from each other. By the way, just I think primarily out of fear, because they don't want to solve the problem. So instead of solving the problem, they just completely like keep them together. You know how it's like whenever you have like two kids who they act up in class a lot together. So that instead of the teachers like trying to teach them how to not do that, sometimes, and I can speak from experience, they'll just separate you.
Them.
Yeah, they'll just put you in another class. That's what they did to me. One of my best friends and I, we talked a lot when we were younger, and they just separated it. They didn't try to like address it. They just separated us. So it's like, I think of PvP and PvE in that way. Developers are like, let's keep this as far away as possible, because in most cases people have tried this and it doesn't really work. So like, let's not piss people off. But like you said, Black Runes, the problem with that is that you then miss all of that content that goes with that. And it goes into kind of like the other part that I wanted to mention, which is that I'm just tired of this whole helpless PvEer meme. And what I mean by that is that a PvE player, on average, if that's what they focus on, of course they're not going to have a geared character for PvP, or they're not going to be ready for PvP. But I'm tired of like the whole mentality where people say just because you like to PvE, you're somehow just like helpless. It's like, you're only helpless because you yourself, your skill isn't good enough, and there's no tools for you to change that, if that makes sense. So it's like, if my skill isn't good enough to just like beat up my opponent, well then I need another way of dealing with him. And that's the problem, is that in MMOs, how do you deal with people like that? Well, you get a bigger group. That's pretty much your biggest solution. But something that Card just mentioned in chat as well is that, and this is something I see a lot, and something that we talked about earlier in the chat as well with Ginger, is that I hate seeing the idea that PvEers also can't game a system and also come out on top, possibly even in PvP, and they can, and oftentimes it's because PvEers care more about the economy, so they're making good money, and guess where that money goes? That money goes, and you spend it on, buying a mercenary army or whatever else. It's just a matter of like, there has to be more avenues of approach like that for players who don't just want to respond to a incursion with, I will attack you. That's like the only response at the moment. In most MMOs, it's just like, how do you respond when someone attacks you or just ganked you? I will kill you back. There's not a whole lot of options of what you can do. There has to be more options of like bounty systems, getting thrown in jail, alignment and faction systems that actually matter. In fact, while we're on this topic, Ginger brought up Legends of Aria and how they're now transitioning to a PvE game. I'm going to say something secret about Legends of Aria that, I'm not sure if anyone else knows this. Maybe I told Ginger, but when I talked to the developers behind that game, one of the first things I told them is, what are you guys going to do about PvP? What are you going to do about alignments? And they're like, well, we have a system right now, and we're hoping that it's going to work out, is what the guy said to me. And when he said that to me, it was like after that moment, I just realized these guys are just hoping to figure it out as they go. And it doesn't work like that. You cannot figure that shit out as you go, especially if you want to make a big PvP game. You can't have a system that's just, I'm red or I'm blue. Because, I mean, here's the hilarious thing, and Ginger will admit this as well. Most of us were red. When we played Legends of Aria, most of us were red. Is it because we're necessarily bad people? I don't think so. But it's because what the fuck else is there to do except just kill other players? There's nothing else to do. So, I don't know. It's just developers will make a game, give players no tools, and then be like, well, why won't they fix it on their own? Why do we have to intervene?
To sort of respond to that whole rant in regards to sort of why they're afraid, I think it's the same reason they're also somewhat afraid of creating sandboxes, and that is, as you mentioned, it because there's certain problems that can occur from it, and those problems can be really hard to solve. Of course, it doesn't help that you also come unprepared and just willy-nilly hope that people themselves sort of figure it out. Because, I mean, we have seen a few games where it's like, just doesn't end up particularly good when you give people the power to sort of decide over the game. I think the best example I can think of is something like ArcAge, which had several servers where the PvP was just so absolutely abysmally unbalanced, and there sort of just wasn't anything that you could really do about it. I don't even think, even if you gave them all sorts of tools, it was simply just so many people that just joined the exact same side and just plowed everyone down that stood in their way.
One thing I want to respond to NS about is I hate it when in games that have a broken system where there's a lot of griefers and a lot of PvE that are helpless. Is that the players start blaming the community, and then I'm just like, you cannot blame the community. You have to blame the developers for creating this system, this broken system that allows them to grief and attack these PvE players, and these PvE players not having other abilities other than killing them or hiring or just killing them to defeat them or get them out of their way.
I mean, to go back to the you can't expect players to fix it. I mean, EVE Online, everybody knows it has been and still is quite in a tricky state on the Tranquility server. And right now, CCP is doing a lot of interesting stuff. It feels like they're throwing a lot of the stuff at the wall. They have some ideas and they're just trying to see what's going to stick, what's going to work. And that's great. What a lot of people are not too aware of is that EVE Online had and still has a server in China, because for a long time you needed to have separate servers in China, which was known as the Serenity server. The Serenity server, in the end, fell completely under the control of one alliance. They just conquered everybody, and at some point they were just so powerful, nobody could do anything against them. It's like, whenever somebody tried something, it's like they formed up a fleet, they went somewhere, there were spies in there already, and it was just like they a whole bunch of times up the field, annihilate the entire fleet in one single strike, and then they just go back. And this is where CCP right now, what you're seeing doing is like with these invasions in 0-0 space and Tranquility, is they're trying to, put those massive PvP alliances, those power blocks that are of immense strength and have been blueballing each other, under pressure again. It's like, hey, you need to do something. One, because you're actually getting attacked by PvE forces, and number two, there is incentive in trying to deal with these PvE forces. And I think there are some other plans that are putting in there as well that will help with these things. But like, they're actually starting to use what nerdSlayer is saying in chat. It's like using PvE to solve PvP situations. And that's a great thing to do. And you kind of have to. You can't expect everything to sort itself out. Because in the end, certain groups will always grow to be the most powerful power at any given time. And if you wait long enough, they can take over completely, and it will take such a long time, and literally like the people in power to pass away, or in this case maybe quit the game, in order perhaps to start to see some changes. I mean, look at human history in this regard. There have been a lot of examples in the past and current.
I think another problem that PvE and PvP integration has in MMORPGs is that I think that the community is like very divided. I think that nowadays, like the people who play like mainstream theme park MMORPGs, I'd say most of them don't like PvP, and the people who like PvP are playing more niche sandbox games like If. And I think like if you were to make a new game, a new MMORPG, and you wanted to like market and aim for both the PvP and the PvE audience, you would have a hard time because like I think like they're so divided that you just like can't offer both of them together. I think a lot of people would look at it and say, "Oh, I don't care about the PvE. I just want the PvP." And a lot of other people would say, "Oh, I just like the PvE, and I'm not gonna touch the PvP." And I think that like that's a problem that new games that want to do something like that will have to face.
Yeah, I think like to really make a good like next gen future game that balances PvE and PvP properly. Black Ruins brought up Rust in the chat. You need to add some sort of survival aspect as the PvP side. Atlas did really good at launch with this and had a strong PvE element to it as well, with taming and just actually surviving in that game, because surviving in it was extremely difficult. I think if you're looking for the next great MMORPG when it comes to balancing and actually having effective PvP and PvE, it has to somehow actually make a hybrid survival that gives you a risk and reward for doing PvE, just like everybody in this chat's basically talked about, like having some sort of PvP fear and how that kind of makes you feel more at risk. I know a lot of the games I played, like Ultima Online, Legends of Aria, these sandboxy full loot drop PvP games, you were always terrified when you had good loot on you. Always terrified. If you were in a dungeon, because dungeons weren't instanced, always terrified if you had good loot on you that a gank squad might be coming or something like that. And I think with how well the survival market's been doing, they have an EA game coming out like every other week at this point, and like people just jump and jump and jump between new EA titles all the time. And then you have games like Rust and Ark and Conan Exiles that have super strong player bases that are still going after years. If you could somehow make a hybrid that has strong PvE elements of an MMORPG with the PvP elements of a survival game, I think you make a golden egg right there.
Yeah, but I would still think that it would be hard to market. Like, how do you convince someone who plays modern theme park MMORPGs and normally mostly only cares about PvE, and whenever he feels like playing PvP, instead of playing the PvP in that game, he just like plays some competitive game like MOBA or Counter Strike or something like that, right? Because he doesn't see the value in having PvP in an MMORPG, and thus I think it would be really hard for like for you if you were like to make a new game and market it towards that this kind of audience. Like, I think it would be really hard to get to like really manage to get their attention.
To respond to Scythe, I don't think there's players who would rather PvP in Counter Strike and other MOBAs. I don't think they would be the audience for that type of games. You know, You can't cater to everyone sometimes. And I think same with PvP is when they say when PvE is say to PvP is like, why don't you go play MOBAs or go play Counter-Strike? Well,
Oh god.
yeah, it's completely different. Different things are at stake. It's more long-term consequences in PvP if there is any, not like Guild Wars 2 where it's just arena-based. It's quite different in what your stakes are, and also the combat is also quite different usually in these MMORPGs.
Okay. Looks like you basically said what Limpos was going to say. And it's funny enough, I was going to say something similar along the lines of, I think part of the problem is making an audience that's not your audience, part of your audience, and then wondering why they don't like other things that are normal in your genre. Like, what I mean is, you make an MMO, and then people complain, oh, why do I have to group with people? It's like, well, that's what the genre was actually based on. So it's like you run into this weird scenario where you're trying to explain to the current generation of fans that their version or view of what they see as an MMO is kind of not really an MMO. It's like that's kind of what I notice in this scenario. It's like it's hard to tell people that because that's the only experience they know, and also you're talking to an audience who isn't even like the typical MMO player in the first place. So they're just like playing the game because it's fun, because they like it, whatever, right? But are they playing any other MMOs? Are they actually like involved in that that culture, if you will? Because most people who follow an MMO don't post on the forums. Most people who follow an MMO probably aren't going to talk about it on Reddit or whatever else, right? These are based on numbers I've seen from developers themselves. As little as like 20% of your audience will post on a forum, right? That's a small percentage. So it's like the only people who are going to post, of course, are going to be the really passionate, excitable ones. And so maybe that's why we see a lot of rhetoric all over the internet of, why don't you just go play a MOBA? Because essentially, if you say such a thing, you don't understand how MMOs work. Because you don't understand that maybe there's something other than just the combat aspect that people like. I know it's crazy to think about, but maybe there's something other than just the fighting part that people like persistence, like social interactions, right? It's hard to explain that though to people who, again, don't see MMOs as that. So it's like you're literally trying to have a conversation with somebody where neither of you can agree on the definition. So of course you're not going to see eye to eye. Of course, I have fans who say like, oh, why do you hate Final Fantasy so much? Or why do you hate this game so much? It's like, I don't hate it. It's just not what I see as an MMO. It's not what I like in an MMO. I can like it for what it is, enjoy it for what it is, but it's not exactly what I like or what I want per se. And I think that's the hard part is right now, us trying to have discussions about this, it's easier amongst the group of us because all of us have experience with MMOs. We know kind of what to expect, and we've been here for a while, so we've seen a lot of different games come out, or you've watched my videos on them at least, if you didn't get the chance to play them back then. So it's different in a discussion like this. It's more nuanced. But have you guys tried having this discussion on, I don't know, the MMORPG subreddit, or just really anywhere else on a forum or something like that? You will get shouted down, and people will say a bunch of rhetoric that's not even necessarily true, but they're not the core audience anyway. So it's like, how do you debate against somebody who doesn't even agree with the core definition of the game? You can't really, because it's not made for them, just as maybe that game isn't made for you.
Can I add one thing?
Sure.
It will be quick. So, like, I wasn't specifically talking about the people who actually want, who are like a different audience, like who want competitive games. I'm talking more about the people who could be interested in PvP, but since like the mainstream sandbox I mean not sandbox, sorry, I mean theme park MMORPGs don't offer a good PvP experience. They have like given up on it and they don't think it can be any good. So I think like trying to convince those people who have given up on PvP because it's not fun for them. I mean, sorry, I mean like it's not satisfying for them, like the current state of it. I think trying to convince them to like go back to PvP, I think it would be really hard.
I think I sort of see what you're saying in the sense of like for people who've already had sour grapes, like are you going to be able to convince them to go back into it? Probably not. But here's where I'm going to say something that might be like seen as controversial is like I think a natural player burn is that like it's natural. Like a player burn is natural. So it's like your MMO is going to lose players because again, let's use the real world as an example. Is everyone who signs up to be a soldier going to be a good soldier? No. People quit. People leave. People fail sometimes. And so like that doesn't get acknowledged enough in MMOs because when a player fails, they leave a lot of the time. So it's like we don't get to see their perspective as Yoshida and the previous director on Final Fantasy 1.0 said, 14.1.0 rather. He said that the majority of people who leave your game aren't going to tell you why. And he said that the people that are going to tell you why are just a small percentage of that population. So like when he made that observation, you know, which is obviously pretty obvious if you just follow the forums, but it's significant, right? It's like, I think, are you going to ever be able to convince that person to replay or play a new PvP experience? Maybe not, but maybe you're not necessarily supposed to, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Because like there's going to be a burn of players. Some people are going to get turned out by things. I think as long as you do a good enough job of keeping PvEers and PvPers feeling like they're both supported as players, you could do it in many ways where, for example, like Dark Age of Camelot did, you could have a frontier zone, which is a PvP zone, but you could have a safe zone, which is a zone right before that, which has less rewards, less XP boost, and will give you less benefits from grinding there, but it's safe. And I think that shit like that needs to be done more. But why isn't it done more? Well, more resources, right? More lands to create, more areas to work on. It all comes back to money. But anyway, I felt like I've gone on, and we've gone on for a bit here. I'd like to, first take the opportunity to thank everybody for stopping by today and joining me on this MMO Roundtable. I think there's still a lot more discussion to be had on this topic because there's so many different versions, I feel like, of this question, or also just different aspects, even just today alone, that we've covered that maybe we could cover another time. So yeah, thanks everybody for stopping by and telling me your perspectives.
Bye.
Yep, thanks for having us, dude.
You're welcome, Ennis.
All right, see you later, guys. Thanks for stopping by. See you, Card. All right, so we've reached the end of that, which now means I can go ahead and transition us to the call-in segment. We're keeping the podcast short today, which means you guys are going to get a little bit of Final Fantasy XIV gameplay of me today, hopefully. The reason why I say a little bit is I try and keep my energy levels good, because I train just about every day in jiu-jitsu. Like, I try and do it just about every day. Like, I can't train on Sundays because they don't have Sunday sessions, and Saturdays are too earlier in the day for me. And most of the time I try and stream. Well, this last Saturday I was going to stream. I had a headache, so unfortunately I didn't get to stream, but anyway. Sorry, Limpos, I know it's your favorite game ever, but... so go ahead and at me in chat if you guys have any questions you'd like to ask me. Oh wow, we did hit 50 subs. Thanks, Card, for letting me know. Anime Pantsu, I want to thank you for joining the Nor Club and your Twitch Prime subscription. Here is a tilt for your patronage. I will force him to watch it. The players that leave and let you know why are probably the ones that you can actually get back in because they cared enough to let you know why. That's a good point. Remember people around... Oh, okay. Gotcha. Yeah. Oh, that reminds me, guys. For those who have been following our WoW guild or have interest in playing WoW with us, which I feel like is at least a good amount of you guys, so I'll talk about that really quickly. We have a guild meeting coming up this Wednesday, so and I'm actually 2 days or whatever else, or was it? No, next week. Next week is when we said. Sorry, I'm totally off. I looked at the calendar and I was like, wait, 2 days is Wednesday. No, okay, so it's next week. Next week on the 7th of August, we have, at the same time of my podcast, which is right about now, we're going to have a guild meeting for the Classic WoW Clan. And there's Google Docs listed on the Discord if you want to see some information regarding about our lore and how we're going to kind of structure things. I posted all of that in our Discord, so go to the Discord and look under the WoW Classic section, click how to join. You can find out everything you need in order to come join us in our experiences in WoW. To make it even more exciting and interesting, we decided that, well, if we don't get an RP PvP server, we're not going to let that stop us from doing some sort of roleplay. So because we're a PvP clan that roleplays light, I'm calling it an RP light PvP clan. RP light essentially to me means in character, like say chat, you need to be just about in character. And what I mean by just about in character is that you can say, hey, can you help me? You can say that, but you can't say, hey, bro, would you mind showing up on the flip side and helping me get some top tier loots? Like maybe you wouldn't say that, right? RP light is kind of like, how can I say what I want to say without sounding like I'm trying to be an internet speaker? Kind of like how RP light is. Sub nerds, exactly. So the way that that's going to work is we've came up with this idea, and Card is going to help me with this idea. So everybody, thank Card. But the idea is going to be weekly. We're thinking we're going to have some weekly adventures, some RP stories that are told from the perspective of maybe different characters, but mostly from the perspective of the drunk Taran Druid, as Card is saying. He will write the stories based on what happens in that week for the clan. So, like, let's say the clan Omrigor decides to go raid, Stormwind. He can, and we can, create a story out of that. So that way we can, keep the game fun and fresh, and also keep conflict, and also just tell a story that could potentially be turned into a video. So we could even make it a video series, really. It's just a small idea that I've always wanted to do that I've never really done before. And so yeah, it could be written stories, or it could be even a voice one, which would be hilarious. But it's like that gives you guys the ability, if you can't play with us, to still follow our journey. And also if you do want to play with us, it gives you the ability to just, get a little bit of flair to see kind of how your contributions have affected the world and affected the storytelling. Anything else? Let me see. Oh, also, there's going to be a trial status. If I haven't played a game with you before, and I don't have essentially like a rep on you, everybody who joins the clan is going to be placed under a trial status unless otherwise notified. And the trial status essentially is just, that's where Limpos is going to have to do some work. Limpos is our recruitment officer, as you guys can probably see. That's a really good job for him since he never shut. No, I'm just kidding. But Limpos will have to evaluate the trial members as being essentially, are they part of the community? Are they contributing? And are they having a good time? Because it's also a personal thing too. You don't want to join a clan and be like, oh, nobody wants me here. I hate this place. You know what I'm saying? Like, you want to join a place that you also find enjoyable, and hopefully finds you enjoyable. So it's a trial status that could go from anywhere to 1 to 2 weeks. No more than that. Trust me, we're not doing anything crazy. That's just because I really care about the environment on my Discord and also in my guilds. In the past, I've been a little bit lax. In fact, sometimes I've just let people just invite whoever they want to the clan, and we've had some interesting things happen because of that. So the trial status, no matter what, is going to happen. If I don't know you and I've not played games with you, you're going to be put on trial status, and all you have to do is just be a natural, human being who likes to play games in a guild, and you'll get accepted, basically. As long as you're not crazy, as long as you contribute, as long as you play as if you would just want to be in a guild in the first place, you're going to be accepted into the guild. You asked a question, Sion. Where at? When analyzing MMORPGs and seeing how many of them ended up failing for different reasons, and how they've been in decline for several years, and new things that come out failing badly, how do you manage to keep your spirits up? Wow, that's a really good question. That's a really good question, Sion. Maybe I should make a video about that. How do you stay an MMO fan despite all of the constant slaps in the faces, the false promises, the failed games, the time spent? I mean, it's hard to be an MMO fan. That deserves a video in its own right. I'm going to say shit, that video could be called a love letter to MMOs. Where it's almost like you're talking about this ex, like you're with this ex-girlfriend who she gives you a great experience, but she also treats you like shit a lot of the time. So you're praying and hoping for the best in her. Anyway, to answer that question seriously, jokes aside, it's because for me, it's sort of like there's certain things in my life that I see as just like, this is part of my life because this is something I enjoy and this is something I want to be doing my whole life. There was a point during my childhood where I stopped looking at the outside as a place to be social. I started to withdraw within myself. I was being less social. My parents were going through a divorce. I was living with my mother who was never around. And so I was going through a lot of struggles. And MMOs, back then, were literally the only thing that kept me social, kept me talking to people, kept me learning, kept me meeting people from other countries, Netherlands, Finland, Russia, China, you name it. I was meeting people from all over the globe, learning all of these experiences. I had never even left the country at this time. Like, if you don't count me just going to Mexico, which is right next to me. I never really been anywhere else. I never went overseas. And so, like, MMOs allowed me to travel to Japan. You know what I'm saying? Like, they allowed me to go to the Netherlands. They allowed me to meet Finnish people, which are awesome to play PvP games with. Like, MMOs opened my mind up to things that I would have never otherwise opened my mind up to. Role-playing, social interactions with people that I don't know. That wasn't something that I did, like creating clans and my own like websites so I could have like my guild have its own like forums and role play. Like MMOs taught me so much and I feel like I owe them so much. And I still think that we're yet to see them at their greatest. And so that's how I stay, I guess if you want to say, that's how I keep my spirits up. That's how I don't get depressed about it, is that I know what those games can mean to people, what they can do to people. They can change your life. Because as I've mentioned before, MMOs aren't just games. They're worlds. And that's more than just being a game. A world is more than just being a game. And so I'm just essentially like I'm attached at the rear, or attached at the hip. I'm attached at the hip with MMOs, and even when they're bad, I'm going to be, here banging my drum, hoping that somebody is listening. And if I have to play a couple of duds along the way, that's going to happen. I understand that, and I'm okay with that. I would rather keep looking at what I know that they can be than just looking at what's currently the situation, because that's what most people do. But I'm trying to look ahead and see what could MMOs be in 10, 20, 30 years, right? And I want them to be so much more than they are now. So I guess that's what keeps me in high spirits, is I care a lot about it and I want them to get better. And they just mean so much to me. I just don't see how I could ever not play or support them. Ginger Spice asked, did you actually see what they're doing with LOA? I did not. It's going to be suicide. Was friendly with a lot of the Reds planning and returning for Steam launch August 6th. Do something before vanilla, and bam, they killed the hype for the Red side. I don't even know why they still went through with that system even after being told repeatedly it wasn't going to work. If we all roll trolls, we can just be jive-ass Jamaicans. That would be a hilarious clan. When's the RP PvP video? Thanks for mentioning that, Alondres. It's being worked on right now, so I'm still writing it. I've put a lot more progress into it than I did last time, and I've already actually started writing the script. I'm about maybe 1 or 2 pages in, so once that's going to be a short video. That one should be out pretty soon. So thanks for mentioning that, so I don't forget about that one as well. What else did I miss? The most dangerous trait, hope. No, I agree, Limpos. There's a lot to talk about with failed games, and that's part of the problem is the discussion gets mucked up when it just seems like people just want to shit talk it. Like when you have people like Clean Prince Gaming, who I don't think adds any value to the discussion, about when things suck. Because if you only talk about when things suck and you don't talk about how they could be better or what to do to make them better, you're kind of just a naysayer. You're kind of just a doomsayer. You're like that dude outside of KOTOR 1 in the first planet, where he essentially is on Terrace. You guys remember on Terrace? There's that one doomsayer guy who's like really like xenophobic and doesn't like aliens, and he's shouting up to everyone, "Oh, the end is coming!" Like, you'll be that guy essentially. You don't want to be that guy. I just feel bad when I see the current day MMORPGs. I feel kind of hopeless, not going to lie. Some years ago, I thought that MMORPGs in the future were going to be awesome, with better technology, more people, but instead they ended up worse than they were before and barely evolved. And that happened to the movie industry as well. When a blockbuster, I saw Black Runes' name and said Blackbuster. That's funny. When a blockbuster happens in an industry, it changes it. It will never be the same. The MMO industry will never be the same because now we've seen the lights. We've seen what's possible, you know? And that's almost more like pervasive than anything else, you know? When you've seen what's capable, it's what keeps you from like abandoning it altogether, because you still have some shred of hope. They're making all the PvE zones and allowing they're making all zones PvE zones and allowing reds into blue cities, with Oasis being the only PvP zone. Sounds like what Ultima Online did with Trammel. It literally sounds like Trammel. That's pretty funny. So SC in 10 to 20 years will be your next MMO. Yeah, Star Citizen in 2029. You guys will hear me banging that drum. But at least there's a few gems in the gaming industry. While in the MMORPG, they're much rarer, and normally the MMORPGs that are generally regarded as good are old ones. So I don't like when people make a statement like, well, the only good MMOs are the old ones. Because that's like that's not a very helpful thing to state. And what I mean by helpful is, I guess, it's not helpful in the sense of, essentially what you're saying is like, nothing is redeemable in the current day. In a way, right? You're saying like, we should all look to the past. What that makes some people think is that you're being kind of like anti-progressive, if that makes sense. They think, well, you don't want to change things. You just want things to stay the same. You're just so stuck up in your nostalgia. And it's like, well, not necessarily. It's not that, you know, me personally, that I'm stuck up in nostalgia. Otherwise, I'd be playing Galaxies right now. Because I think that's the best MMO. If it was just nostalgia, right, I'd just be playing that game. But it's not just nostalgia. It's looking back and seeing, what did they do right that has been done wrong now? And the thing I'll leave you guys with in terms of the call-in segment, because I think it's time to start playing some Final Fantasy XIV on stream, you know, just for, you know, 1 or 2 hours. I wanted to get some gameplay in, probably like about 2.5 hours. It's going to be a shorter gameplay stream, but it's just a bonus stream anyway, so don't hold it against me. I already forgot what I was saying earlier. When you're doing like 20 things at the same time, sometimes, yeah, you forget what you're saying. After Season 5, Guild Wars 2 is dead. Nice name, dude. I would say that, yes, they were good for the time, but a lot of it is experience and people, not the games being these perfect gems. Well, yeah, and I think that's the thing that I'm trying to outline is, you can say the old games are better and you can say the old games are good, but don't say that they're perfect, or don't imply that they're perfect, because it's very important to realize that they aren't perfect, so you can then realize, why did the modern way of games go the way that it did? What you'll often find, at least in my experience, is that, wait a minute, apparently there's a maintenance today. Oh, it's not right now. Okay. I thought the maintenance was right now. I was like, oh no. We're at 51 subs, by the way, guys. Y'all are crazy. Some crazy. It's funny. The joke that I made to my girlfriend is, who would have known if I just played MMOs, people would sub to me? I say that jokingly because obviously if it was that easy, I would have just played them from the start, but there wasn't really any that seem like they were any fun to play. So let me change my stream title. Day 3 of FF main questing. Okay, changing all of that stuff now. I know we don't normally do this. We don't normally keep going and then turn it into a Final Fantasy XIV stream, but I figured, why not? My girlfriend isn't home until another 2 hours, so I figured I can stream for another 2 hours before we get some dinner. Sorry, lunch. Unsubbed for playing MMOs and not ranting 24/7. I know, it's like... What do people want, right? They're like, damn it, NS, nerdSlayer, why are you playing Final Fantasy XIV? Why don't you play my game? Oh yeah, why do you only make videos about dying games, by the way? You should play more MMOs. It's like, which is it? Do you want me to stick by my principles and only play the games I want to play? Or take chances in playing the games that I don't really want to play, just so I can kind of like learn some more perspective, or also just play an MMO, period?